The year is 1922. The streets of New York City echo with the clatter of horse-drawn carts, the shouts of vendors, and the endless hum of a city that never sleeps. In the narrow alleys of Little Italy, Italian immigrants huddle in cramped tenements, their dreams of America colliding with the harsh reality of survival. This isn't a story about luxury. This is a story about survival. About 30 foods that kept families alive when hope was all they had left. About how the most humble ingredients, born from necessity, would eventually conquer the world. Picture Maria Rossi, her weathered hands kneading dough in a kitchen no bigger than a closet. Outside, the city roars with possibility, but inside these walls, every meal is a small miracle. She's not cooking to impress anyone. She's cooking to survive. Bread was everything. When you had nothing else, you had bread. Homemade loaves filled empty stomachs when the rent was due and the cupboards were bare. Families would gather around these golden rounds, tearing off pieces with reverence, knowing that tomorrow's bread wasn't guaranteed. Garlic hung in braids from every ceiling, its pungent aroma masking the smell of too many people living too close together. For many families, garlic meant comfort. A single clove could transform water and flour into something that tasted like home, like the hills of Sicily they'd left behind. Olive oil was liquid gold. Often imported from the old country, it was used sparingly, each drop measured like medicine. Mothers would guard their bottles jealously, knowing that this precious oil could make even the stalest bread taste divine. Onions were the foundation of everything. Cheap, filling, and able to stretch any meal into something substantial. They'd caramelize slowly in those tiny kitchens, filling the air with sweetness that made everyone forget, for just a moment, how little they actually had. Tomato sauce wasn't the rich, complex creation we know today. It was simple. Tomatoes, salt, maybe a whisper of herbs if you were lucky, but slow cooking turned these basic ingredients into something magical, something that could make pasta feel like a feast. Speaking of pasta, it was the great equalizer. Flour, water, and strong hands created filling meals for large families. Spaghetti, macaroni, whatever shape you could manage, it all served the same purpose, keeping hunger at bay for another day. Beans and lentils were the poor man's protein. When meat was a luxury you couldn't afford, these humble legumes stepped in. Cannellini beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, they'd simmer for hours, filling the apartment with the promise of a full belly. Nothing was thrown away. Yesterday's dinner became today's lunch. Stale bread became breadcrumbs. Leftover pasta became frittata. Even the water used to cook vegetables was saved, transformed into the base for tomorrow's soup. Potatoes were another lifeline. Cheap, filling, and versatile. They could be boiled, fried, mashed, or thrown into stews. A single potato could stretch a meal for an entire family, and families learned to make them last. Salt was precious, but essential. It preserved food, enhanced flavor, and reminded these immigrants of the sea that separated them from everything they'd known. Every grain was counted, every pinch deliberate. Cheese was a rare treat. When families could afford it, they'd buy small chunks of hard cheese, grating it carefully over pasta or saving it for special occasions. The rind was never discarded. It went into soups to add depth and richness. Eggs were gold. When a family was lucky enough to have them, they were used sparingly. One egg could bind a frittata that fed 6 people or be whisked into pasta water to create a creamy sauce without cream.
Meat was expensive. Most families ate it only on Sundays or special occasions. When they could afford chicken, one bird would feed a family across multiple meals. First, the meat, then the bones for broth, then the scraps for soup. Fish was more accessible, especially salted cod. It could be stored without refrigeration and stretched into multiple meals. Families would soak it overnight, then cook it with tomatoes and onions, making it last for days. Seasonal fruits were treasures. When summer brought cheap peaches or winter offered discounted apples, families would buy in bulk, preserving what they could and savoring the rest. Fresh fruit was often the only dessert children knew. Greens were foraged from empty lots and parks. Dandelion leaves, wild spinach, anything edible that grew for free. These bitter greens were sautéed with garlic and oil, providing vitamins that expensive vegetables couldn't offer. Coffee was a luxury, but a necessary one. Families would buy small amounts of beans, grinding them carefully and making each cup count. The grounds were often reused, creating weaker and weaker brews until nothing remained. Even simple pleasures like homemade cookies were luxuries. Made with the cheapest flour and whatever sugar could be spared, they were saved for holidays or given to children as rare treats. Ricotta was sometimes made at home from leftover whey, nothing wasted, everything repurposed. This fresh cheese would be eaten immediately or used in simple desserts that reminded families of celebrations back home. Wine, when it existed, was homemade and harsh. Families would make it in basements and closets, fermenting whatever grapes they could afford. It wasn't about quality, it was about maintaining a connection to traditions that defined them. Polenta was comfort in a bowl. Cornmeal cooked slowly with water or milk, stirred constantly until it reached the perfect consistency. It could be eaten hot or allowed to cool and then fried, creating two meals from one simple ingredient. Bones were treasures. Butchers would sell them cheap, and families would simmer them for hours, extracting every bit of nutrition and flavor. These broths became the base for countless meals, stretching ingredients that seemed insufficient into something nourishing. Herbs were grown in windowsill gardens. Basil, oregano, parsley, whatever could survive in the limited light of tenement windows. These small plants provided flavor that made simple meals feel special, connecting families to the gardens they'd left behind. Nuts were holiday luxuries. Walnuts, almonds, whatever could be afforded during Christmas or Easter. They'd be saved and savored, often the only protein children would taste for weeks. Honey was medicine and sweetness combined. When sugar was too expensive, honey provided the sweetness that made bitter medicines palatable and simple desserts possible. Vinegar was essential for preservation and flavor. Families would make their own when possible, using it to pickle vegetables and preserve food for leaner times. Milk was often watered down to make it last longer. Children would drink this thin mixture without complaint, understanding instinctively that this was all there was. Flour was the foundation of everything. Bread, pasta, dumplings, whatever could be made to fill empty stomachs. Families would buy it in bulk when they could afford it, storing it carefully and using every grain. These 30 foods weren't chosen for their sophistication or their ability to impress. They were chosen because they were available, affordable, and could keep families alive during the hardest times imaginable.
Italian immigrants in 1920s Little Italy cooked with memory, patience, and love. They took the poverty that surrounded them and transformed it into tradition. They turned survival meals into what would eventually become a global cuisine beloved by millions. In those tiny apartments with their cramped kitchens and shared bathrooms, something extraordinary was happening. Families were creating the foundation of what we now call Italian-American food. Every simple meal was an act of resistance against a world that seemed determined to break them. They didn't know they were making history. They were just trying to survive another day, to feed their children, to maintain some connection to the homeland they'd left behind. But in doing so, they created something that would outlast their struggles and touch every corner of the world. This wasn't just food. It was history on a plate. It was love measured in spoonfuls and hope served in bowls. It was the proof that even in the darkest times, even when you have almost nothing, you can still create something beautiful, something lasting, something that will nourish not just your body, but your soul. Today, when we sit in Italian restaurants around the world, when we twirl spaghetti on our forks or dip bread in olive oil, we're tasting the legacy of those brave immigrants who refused to let poverty defeat them. We're experiencing the triumph of the human spirit, one delicious bite at a time.